Oh, hello there. Welcome back. You're still within those first lectures on science-y fun. Hmm, huh. Well, got a long ways to go yet for stuff. But before we go too much further, I want to go over a small case study. Um, Now, I said in the beginning of the course, one of the important things was to be able to delve into science literacy is when engaging with other materials that have come out of a science culture, so published papers, other artifacts, news and journals. These are, how do you interpret those? How do you understand them? And so I want to start with a very basic case study. So you'll see document 3.2 case study student project. And what you want to do is you want to think about this as a kind of like junior student project. Someone who's young in the culture, hasn't engaged as much, but has some basic skills and is beginning of a task to do a project. So when reading this, it's not something that's perfect and fleshed out and answers everything. But it hits along a lot of parts that some things are right, some things are wrong, and we have to start being able to interpret this and understand what's going on. And it's a task that you'll face on the midterm, most likely, and definitely on the final, is that given a case study like this, and if you're someone that we envision is maybe a couple years more older than this individual, and has more experience, and you've been tasked with kind of being a teacher role and giving them feedback, how could you give them helpful, constructive feedback? Not tearing them apart on grammar, not tearing them apart on everything that's wrong, but how can you tell them, like, where can they improve? How can they get better? And this is going to be an important task in this course. Based on what we're learning, how can you identify those key things and give them that proper feedback? So we'll come back to this each week as we cover new material as kind of like an ending point of what we're doing, if not after other sections. Based upon what we've learned now, how can we go back to this case study? So if you want right now, you can pause the video and go and read document 3.2 and make some notes yourself. I'm going to use a text-to-speech program right now and run this so that you can also just sit back and listen to the entire case study. And you don't need to understand everything now. Let's just give big bang context. Now, once either you've read it and come back to this video or you're done listening to the text-to-speech program, I'm going to go through it and kind of give a general overview based on what we learned, some of the things that we can see in this case study. Okay. Take it away, natural reader.
Provide them with constructive feedback on how to improve their argument. Bring in as many facts from the entire course as you can. Back up your arguments with facts from the description of the student's project and the course material. I was tasked with setting up an experiment to evaluate if a new type of fertilizer for its effectiveness, not sure why. I was told it has helped a single pea plant to grow better in the past. Due to this, I think that it will also help a field of corn to grow better. My hypothesis is, if the new fertilizer is added to the soil before planting the seeds, the corn will be sweeter. For my experiment, I set up 2 fields and monitored them for 3 months. In one field, I will call it field poopy corn, I planted 3 corn seeds with the fertilizer applied to the soil. This field is located in the northeastern part of the country. In the other field, I will call it field no poopy corn, I planted 7 corn plants without using the fertilizer. This field is located in the southeastern part of the country. On the first day of each month, I watered each field using the same amount of water per plant. During this time, I also recorded the height of each corn plant and how many fully developed ears of corn, i.e. the edible yummy part of the plant, that I could pick off the plant, which I weighed and recorded the values in kilograms. After 3 months, based on my data, I made the following statistical calculations only using the gathered weight values. I rounded all values to 2 decimal places. kg equals kilograms. Poopy corn, 25.45 kilograms plus minus 4.0 with a median of 15 kilograms. No poopy corn, 27.34 kilograms plus minus 6.0 with a median of 13 kilograms. After the experiment and staring at the numbers, I made the following analysis. I looked at the mean of both fields first. The mean of the poopy corn field was lower than the no poopy corn field. This tells me that more than half the values from poopy corn were lower than the values from no poopy corn. This naturally shows that the corn from poopy corn field must have been producing sweeter corn on a larger scale. The median values of the poopy corn field are higher than the no poopy corn field. This tells me that the central tendency of the field was higher, but not by much, so the sweetness of the corn must also be higher. The standard deviation of the poopy corn fields is also small and closer to 0. This tells me that the values do not spread out as far as the no poopy corn fields. This shows us that the sweetness factor is also more concentrated in the poopy corn field. Based on these results, they concluded that they have verified that the new fertilizer will always produce the sweetest corn.
Okay, so that was one general quick read through. I'm going to switch to Word here. Go through. So again, this is not perfect. This is something that needs a lot of work. Later in the course, we'll look at other articles and examples from news things and how to interpret them from someone who's more experienced in the field. But right now, we've got the task. They are a junior person. We want to help them out. We have a little bit more knowledge. Now, we're only one beginning step in the actual course. So a lot of things in grammar and other stuff that's wrong in the document, but that's beyond the point here. Now we have to see, well, so far, if we're looking back at the current notes 3, we've talked about, causality, cause and effect, empirical evidence, and we've talked about the scientific method of asking a question, background research, setting up a hypothesis, predictions, running an experiment, that experiment procedure, analyzing that actual data and coming to some conclusion and reporting it. So, already we can say they've got to the reporting phase. They've written it up and they present it to us. Not much feedback for them here, but it's a starting point. Next thing I'd want to look for is, okay, well, have they at least kind of written stuff up in a logical, flowing format that follows the kind of scientific method, where they explain and kind of guide you through their thought process, which is somewhat of their question to the background research, how do they get the association, what is their cause and effect, do they have a hypothesis or predictions, next, does it flow through everything else? So we'll start at the very beginning. And they said, okay, I was tasked with setting up to evaluate a new type of fertilizer for its effectiveness. Didn't really have to go from that in the beginning, but we can kind of look at a cause and effect. It's not really asking a question. They've been given this task, but we want to look for, the preceding cause and then effect, and then see, okay, does that translate through everything else that they're doing? So here they're talking about a fertilizer for its effectiveness. So not sure why. So this means more its effectiveness is in plant growth. We saw that as an example in the previous notes. So here I would say, okay, well, the cause is generally fertilizer that's being used, and its effectiveness for saying what is plant growth. And that's some of the background research if you look into fertilizers, what they can actually do. They go on to say, I was told it has helped a single pea plant to grow better in the actual past. Right here. Okay, well, that's somewhat of their background research. Here they said that they've been told that a single pea plant and it grew better in the past, but they don't really help us to go and be able to check that out. Like, who did they hear this from? Can we talk to that same person? Even better is it should be from some research online that can be cited, and that we should be able to go and find those citations. Find the paper, read it, and validate what they were actually doing. Can we go back through this? And so we're still seeing a cause and effect of being some kind of plants and fertilizers and growing better. So if we continue on, they said, due to this, I think that will also help a field of corn to grow better. Okay, getting a little bit more specific, kind of leading into being the hypothesis earlier on / kind of predictions, is now they're saying specifically, okay, corn plants to grow better. Now, one problem here is saying, well, background research, so it's plants, and you've said pea plant to grow better, but is there anything saying then that like there's a link between using fertilizer with pea plants and then using that same fertilizer with corn plants? They should do some research. They should dig deeper into this. They should talk to people and see, is there this connection, or is there better background research that can be done specifically talking about corn plants, what's effective, what's good for the nutrients, what fertilizers then provide those nutrients, and how that can actually work. So their hypothesis here, and we can kind of see, okay, it's starting to look more like the prediction. So we have the if, and maybe there's a then in here. So we go like, if the new fertilizer is added to the soil before planting the seeds, the corn will be sweeter. And you're like, It makes it kind of hard as a testable prediction, but it still at least says fertilizer and sweetness, but they never talked about that before. So we still see the cause being fertilizer being added to the soil before planting the seeds, so very in the beginning. It'll end up resulting in sweeter corn, but they kept talking about growth. And so they didn't really talk more specifically of what they meant by growth, height, amount of corn, leaves, those kind of measurable things. And instead they jumped into, that'll be sweeter. Well, guess they should go back and they should refine then their previous background research and stating what have they shown that of how fertilizer can affect sweetness in relation to some plants, and then especially with corn. Is this possible? They should really probably say what fertilizer they're talking about as well and make that more clear that we can repeat it. And they maybe want to check in on seeing like, okay, what are measures of sweetness? We may not know, but if you do a quick research, there are different scales and different tools for testing for the sweetness in some material. So see how they improve that. But so far, at least they've gone the beginning that they've at least have a question. They've done some background research, and then they formed somewhat hypothesis and somewhat prediction. So these things are good. They just need to expand upon that background research. They need to link to it and cite it saying, where did this research come from, so that we can also go and validate that as well. And they need to show more of a connection with the sweeter. Where is that in their background research? So we'll continue on with this. So now we know that the cause and effect is supposed to be for, okay, like fertilizer and sweeter corn. That's what they're really going for in that actual question. Narrowed it down, even though they started with fertilizer and its effectiveness for growth. So after they said, for my experiment, set up 2 fields, they get the 3 months and everything here, and like, oh, okay. So after the hypothesis, they're going into the testing the hypothesis, so that experiment phase, where they should have, at least their experiment procedure and setup and controls and everything laid out. So you're like, okay, good, they're at least doing that, but maybe there's more that they need to do and what they need to do within it. Now, we haven't talked specifically about how to set that up or how to delve deeper into that, but that's where future lectures will go over this material. Maybe we'll be able to give them some more feedback. But we can see things like 2 fields, monitor for 3 months, field poopy corn, planted 3 seeds, and all these things. And probably have to go through this and evaluate it more for, do they keep conditions the same and everything else? But we'll do that more in depth later. At least they've got the next experiment phase following up, but there's some things in here that just don't seem exactly right and everything else. During this time, I also recorded the height of each corn plant and how many fully developed ears of corn, i.e. the edible yummy parts of the plant, that I could pick off the plant, which I then weighed and recorded in kilograms. So they're getting into those talking about how they're measuring the empirical evidence. And remember, the measuring here is they're manipulating stuff generally that should be the cause that you're doing for, and then you're looking at the effect right here. So they were saying, okay, corn, fertilizers being added to the corn plants will make it sweeter and need to have some measurement. And even though that wasn't clear earlier, it's not tied to the background research, they seem to be here saying they recorded the height of each plant. So, okay, get some kind of measurement units. They didn't really say how they recorded that. And they then weighed the number of ears of corn that they could pick off the plant. And they kept it in kilograms. But they didn't say anything before this about, what's the background research or saying that sweetness is tied to kilograms? Because again, you're generally measuring stuff for the effect, and they're looking for sweetness. But they've not told us anywhere where they found that sweetness is tied to weight. and how they came to that conclusion. So I'd say they need to either change how they do measurements and go back. They need to maybe change their empirical procedure, experimental procedure, and they need to reevaluate how they're measuring stuff when it comes to sweetness, because I see no ties to this. And personally myself, I have no background I've ever heard of how the weight and sweetness for stuff, not unless you're like a large jolly individual, and then the larger you are, maybe you're more sweet for stuff. But that doesn't tie into corn and sweetness here at all. So that doesn't answer anything. So again, at least they've tried to explain, but they need to fix that kind of stuff up. Following after this, if they've done the whole experiment phase, following experiment procedure and gathering all that data, they then should be going into analyzing it and coming to some conclusion. And it would be good that if you can report your actual data. You may not always need to have showing all the data, but maybe some kind of graphs or some kind of statistical values when we'll get into this later into the actual course of how does that work. So here they've got some numbers, some stats and stuff. We'll talk about this later, so at least they've got that. And then here it's probably like coming down, and this is the analysis phase, and I'll pre-warn you, there's a lot of really bad stuff in this one. They haven't done a good job, but we'll hit that later in the course when we start covering the logical reasoning and we start going over statistical reasoning and quantitative reasoning examples and trying to pull some kind of conclusions. But at least here they end off by saying, so they've got the analysis phase, they're trying to look at the data and come to some conclusion and make an argument. And then they're ending by, based upon these results, to conclude that they have verified the new fertilizer will always produce the sweetest corn. And this is a kind of statement that there's problems with that. Like, they said that it'll always, that it's a truth, that nothing else can be better. And this doesn't really fit with the scientific method. Like, you have to tie back this that, well, it should be more based upon our evidence. I can say that I would accept my hypothesis that it has shown here. And you want to tie it more to the evidence, not saying that it always will. Maybe it was just based upon the experiment conditions they did, it worked out. And this still needs to be validated and repeated, which the procedure didn't really show a lot of repetition of going through this and dealing with showing that it's not just their one special case this happened. And they really shouldn't be ending after whatever argument they made. They should be tied back to like building up the argument in the section above and then finally coming to conclude by showing the argument, showing the steps, leading the other person through. So overall, we can say, well, they've done a write-up. They've got a cause and effect, but it seems to be mixed up. They've done some research, like background research, very basically. They need to expand upon it. So like they followed the basic scientific method. That's a very junior way of it, but they need to go back to each step and they need to expand upon what they're doing. They need to make it better. They need to do more background research. They need to clarify, be more specific about things like fertilizer. Their setup and their like experimental procedure, they need to be clear. It needs to be in such a way that we, as people that relate to them, would be able to go and do that same experiment. And if you're reading it and you would know, like, well, okay, wait, that's confusing. I don't know how I would do that step they talk about, then that's probably something they need themselves to expand upon and add more to it. So I still suggest, I would say yourself right now as a good task is yourself. Just take the Word document and go through it and make these notes, make these comments. So maybe change it to be double spaced or add some references or highlights. And just for yourself is, okay, and go through as if you were a teacher, giving them feedback of how to improve and try to tie it in with definitions, examples from the notes. And this would be a really good practice for yourself right now to make sure what were you understanding for the material and how can you apply it. And then as we keep doing this, you want to keep adding to these notes, and it'll make your life for the midterm like way easier, and for future tasks, and definitely for the final when you have to do a similar thing with another case study like this, that you have had a lot of practice and can get some extra feedback. So if you have extra questions, feel free to contact me. And as always, I still hope you're doing good. And if you're reaching this point in the video and you've covered them, then you should be at the end of this material. And we're one step closer to getting through the course. And as always, I hope you're doing well. You've done something good for yourself, for other people around you, and tried to make this world a little bit better of a place.